The Honorable, the Deputy Speaker.
Matters on the adjournment, I recognize Shogunas West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I rise to speak on the matter on the adjournment entitled "The Failure of the Government to Implement the Recommendations of the Report done by Royal Haskoning, DHV, on Drainage of the Caroni River Basin." Mr. Deputy Speaker, we all recognize that floods...
Member, just for your information, you have 10 minutes because we have two matters on the adjournment.
Yes.
Matters on the adjournment is a total of 40 minutes. And seeing that we have 10 minutes, and then the minister replying 10 minutes, and then we go on to the other one.
So I start at 5:16.
So just for clarity. Right.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, we all recognize that floods impact both on individuals and communities and have social, economic, environmental, infrastructure, agricultural, and health consequences. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is fair to state that in Trinidad and Tobago, floods are the most expensive natural disasters. A cursory glance of the newspapers over the years would reveal that losses to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars are suffered on an annual basis. Floods, that is major flooding in Trinidad, generally occurs in the Caroni, Caparo, and Santa Cruz river basins. However, flooding can occur with devastating effect on smaller basins such as Diego Martin, the Diego Martin Valley, San Fernando, Barrackpore, Sangre Grande, Mayaro, and Pinal. So therefore, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we accept the reality of climate change and its impact. The People's Partnership Government, under our leader Kamla Prasad Bisesa, commissioned a study by the over a century-old firm Royal Haskoning, DHV, in 2012. The objectives of this study, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I would read from the executive summary of that study, the final report dated 18 December 2013. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this study was an entry into the theoretical and conceptual framework for a project to be done in the Caroni, or projects to be done in the Caroni River Basin. It was preceded by studies by Lee Young and partners in the Nariva River Basin, and also the Royal Haskoning in the Caparo River Basin, and also Royal Haskoning in the South Oropouche area. That South Oropouche study, unfortunately, when the current administration, the PNM administration, came into office, they stopped paying the bills and that was abandoned. Mr. Deputy Speaker, so there are two elements of this study. The Caroni River Basin drainage study, inclusive of Cunupia and Madame Espanyol River Catchment, flood mitigation integrated watershed management project. It was set out to reduce the frequency and severity of flooding in the basin, thereby reducing the risks to lives and preventing damage to public and private property and infrastructure. B, it reduced the losses to the productive sector as a result of flooding disruption, optimize the use of water resources in the basin, stabilize the riverbanks, mitigate environmental degradation and health hazards caused by floods, and control sedimentation and erosion in the rivers. The objective of the study is to design a suitable watershed management flood mitigation project for the Caroni River, which is A, consistent with government strategic objectives and immediate priorities, B, technically sound and the best available of the alternatives under existing conditions, C, economically friendly and financially viable, D, environmentally sound, E, sustainable, and F, administratively workable. Mr. Deputy Speaker, you would find that in this study, and it evolved over the 2-year period that the experts were engaged in, that you had first the initial study, and then you had discussions with the drainage department of the ministry together with NIDCO. And as a result of the evolution of the process, there were 4 options. Initially 3, and then a 4th option arrived at in order to deal with the flooding in the Caroni River Basin. Mr. Deputy Speaker, and what were these options and recommendations? 1, the silting of the lower Caroni River and estuary, diversion of the part of the Caroni River peak flow into the Caroni swamp, rehabilitation of 5 pump stations and sediment traps in the subcatchments. That is the whole question of the desilting, effective measures. 2, detention dams, and I'll come back to that. And the 3rd element was utilizing lands as floodplains while protecting built-up development areas with dikes. So that therefore you had, if you look at it conceptually, you are the source, you dealt with at the source, you dealt with the pathway of the river with the construction of dikes and berms, and then you dealt with the flooded areas, the communities that can be flooded. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the study indicated after some deliberation that there should be 21 detention dams, 21 dam sites. And these dam sites are situated in the upper, middle, and downstream reaches of 9 tributaries of the Caroni River. San Juan, 1 dam site. St. Joseph, 2 dam sites. Tacarigua, 3 dam sites. Aruca, 1 dam site. Arima, 3 dam sites. Guanapo, 3 dam sites. Aripo, 2 dam sites. Komoto, 3 dam sites. And Talparo, 3 dam sites. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with each extreme rainfall event, each dam creates a temporary storage lake to detain the discharge of the peak river. A design of the dams is made for a flood event occurrence period of 25 years. The dams detain all the water that is running off from the catchment area upstream of the dam during such event. The detained volume is gradually released after the peak flood event. So you had 21 dams. You had the dredging on the silting of the rivers. And then, Mr. Deputy Speaker, embankments. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the level of embankments was to increase by 2 meters. What is the current situation, Mr. Deputy Speaker?
No embankments.
The river embankments, approximately 5 kilometers along the north bank of the Tunapuna River, 2.5 kilometers along the Tunapuna and Tacarigua rivers, 5 kilometers north of the villages of Lapai, Frederick Settlement, Caroni along the south bank of the Caroni River. Approximately 6.1 kilometers south of the villages of Lapai, Frederick Settlement, and Caroni, and approximately 2.5 kilometers between the rivers Aruca and Oropun. What was the cost of this, Mr. Deputy Speaker? The cost as contained in this study. The cost was projected for this 1 in 25 years occurrence. The principal cost was really the dams themselves. The swamp inlet was projected to cost 28 million. Pump stations, 22.3 million. Sediment traps, 17 million. Embankments, 53 million. And 21 dams, 1.872 billion. So cumulatively, $1.9 billion to deal with this flood prevention and mitigation program in all these communities. What has been the allocation? This study, completed in 2014, could not enter the budgetary cycle for 2014-2015. But since then, Mr. Deputy Speaker, nothing has been done. Nothing has been done. So you have a study completed, $1.9 billion. We have had 4 budgets over the period. Over $250 billion allocated in budgetary allocations. We cannot find, over a 10-year period, the projected development of these 21 dams, together with the embankments, together with the berm building, together with the silting, is $1.9 billion. And what do we have? Nothing. Absolutely no public policy to alleviate the flooding. But we would go on an annual basis and take $47 million from the catastrophe fund. We will have thousands and thousands of communities, over 30,000 residences affected.
2 minutes.
Affected. But instead, Madam, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we're going to buy plane. We find money for plane. I am saying that it is necessary to recognize that government is a continuum. And when you have this study done, it is necessary, instead of we do this thing on an annual basis, looking for hampers to give to people, we find a public policy solution for the flooding in this country. And the project is there. What is required is investment by this administration in stopping the flooding in the Caroni River Basin, the River Basin, the Caparo River Basin, the South Oropouche River Basin, the Digo Martin River Basin. And this is a start, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I thank you.
I'll call on the Acting Minister of Works and Transport. Honourable Member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. On the motion before us today, which seeks to establish whether there is a failure of the government to implement the recommendations of the report done by Royal Haskonen, DHV, on the drainage of the Caroni Base River, I am compelled to respond to this Honourable House on the concerns expressed. In my response to this motion, I will attempt to show and assure the population that consideration is being given to the recommendations on drainage of the Caroni River Basin. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Royal Haskonen DHV, the consultant engaged on the Caroni River Basin drainage study, submitted its final report on December 18, 2013. The study commenced in early 2012 and included the submission of a total of 8 reports as required by the terms of reference. 4 alternatives were recommended in the report and were explored. However, it was determined that alternative 4 is expected to provide the most flood reduction. Based on the details of the report, alternative 4 includes the following. 1, the silting of the lower reaches of the Caroni River. 2, swamp inlet regulator. This would allow water from the Caroni River to flow into the swamp. 3, upgrading of drainage pump stations at the following locations: Felicity, William Street, Sadu Trace, Bamboos number 1, 2, and 3. 4, raising and construction of embankments at Tunapuna, St. Joseph, Caroni, Takorigua, and Oropuna rivers. 5, sediment traps on the St. Joseph and Arima rivers. Permit me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to give an update on each of the areas identified. 1, the silting of the lower reaches of the Caroni River. The river was last desilted in 2012. This was undertaken on a needed basis under a major desilting program. 2, swamp inlet regulator. The Drainage Division and the Institute of Marine Affairs have ongoing discussions on the feasibility and the effects of ecology of the swamp. 3, Felicity Pump Station. The upgrade of William Street, Sadu Trace, Bamboos number 1, 2, 3 pump stations. The upgrade of the Felicity Pump Station is approximately 75% completed. This project entails the construction of a new pump facility and installation of an electric pump. Cabinet in 2018 approved a 2-year contract for the upgrade of pumps and gates. The other stations at William Street, Sadu Trees, Bamboos number 1, 2, and 3 will be considered under the program commencing in fiscal 2019. Raising and construction of embankments at the Tunapuna, St. Joseph, Caroni, Tacarigua, and Orupuna rivers. 1. The silting works were carried out in 2018 on tributaries to the Caroni River, such as Guanapo, Aripo, Tacarigua, Sawa, St. Joseph, and Malik. This increased the waterway capacity in the short term. 2. The Caroni River Rehabilitation and Improvement Works Project has been tendered through the Central Tenders Board. 3. A pre-tender meeting was held on Thursday, November 15, 2018. The project involves the raising sections of the embankment of the Caroni River and the installation of sluice gates between St. Helena and El Socorro South. The procurement process has started and works are expected to commence in 2019. 5. Sediment traps at St. Joseph and Arima. The acquisition of lands is required for these projects and has the potential to displace communities. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in addition, it is also proposed that smaller detention dams and reservoirs, a total of 21, and a series of embankments to undertake to protect the urban areas. Notwithstanding, there are some key issues in implementation of the recommendations. They are A, high capital investment, B, land acquisition costs, this will include relocation of communities, and C, low public acceptance. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the overall flood risks reduction, if all measures were implemented, is 63%. This means, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the flooding would not totally eliminate but minimize. The total estimated cost to implement all of the measures is approximately $2 billion, TT dollars. The costs specified for these recommendations were based on the 2013 figures and are factored for a return period of 1 in a 25-year storm. Based on our reviews, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the House is asked to note that the rainfall event which occurred in 2018 may have surpassed the rainfall in 1 in a 25-year storm. I thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I now recognize the member for Naparima.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, under the Westminster system, which we follow, there is a very important principle of ministerial responsibility. This dictates that ministers are ultimately responsible for each and every decision taken in their respective ministries, whether or not they are involved. When things go right, they take the credit. And when things go wrong, they man up to their responsibilities and resign. Prime Minister Dr. Rowley is clearly not aware of, chooses to ignore, or refuses to practice this principle of ministerial responsibility. Our Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs has a principled duty to resign because of the unfortunate and embarrassing events which took place earlier this year at the OAS. What is worse is that this Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs has failed to advise his Prime Minister and the country that it was under his watch and his leadership that the ministry developed and implemented the policy which was carried out by the Permanent Secretary, the Deputy Permanent Secretary, and Ambassador Anthony Philip Spencer at the OAS meeting in March this year. That year-old and repeatedly articulated policy explicitly stated, and I quote, Trinidad and Tobago is not in a position to facilitate an increase in its assessed contribution in order to accommodate waivers of financial contributions by member states given its current fiscal constraints. End of quote. Accordingly, the ministry would not support requests for waivers by member states. That was the ministry's policy. Everyone knew it included or stroke except the minister. Email correspondence from Foreign Service Officer 3, Amos Seals, in the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs in Port of Spain, dated Friday the 23rd March, to Ms. Kanita Shah, First Secretary in our Washington mission. She clearly outlined this policy. It was the justification used for the directive given to Ambassador Spencer, and I quote, "In this regard, the ministry wishes to refer to the position of Trinidad and Tobago at the following meetings, in which the issue of the waiver and or suspension of payments of contribution for countries negatively impacted by the 2017 hurricane season was tabled." 4 meetings the policy was articulated. The 41st meeting of the Community Council of Ministers on the 15th January in Georgetown, Guyana. It was also articulated at the 4th special meeting of the Budget Committee of CARICOM on the 2nd February. 9th special meeting of the Community Council of Ministers of the Caribbean Community on the 6th of February. And the 11th extraordinary meeting of the Special Committee on Budget Administration on the 6th of February 2018. At all these meetings, Trinidad and Tobago expressed solidarity with member states negatively impacted by Hurricanes Irma and Maria. However, it did not support the granting of waivers of payments of contributions. Alternatively, Trinidad and Tobago proposed that consideration should be given to deferral of payments of contributions by member states and the implementation of a payment plan which is subject to annual review. End of quote. Trinidad and Tobago's position on not granting waivers to CARICOM states was crystal clear, articulated in at least 4 CARICOM meetings. It was settled policy at the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs. If the minister was unaware that this policy was articulated repeatedly, then he has lost control of his ministry and must resign. Section 85(1) of the Constitution states that ministers shall exercise general direction and control over his ministry. If, on the other hand, a minister was the architect of a policy such as this one and chose to deny paternity by passing blame to his subordinates, then he is a very contemptible human being unworthy of holding higher office. I'm speaking generally of a person in this situation. As it stands, therefore, the then Permanent Secretary, the Deputy Permanent Secretary, and Ambassador Philip Spencer are owed nothing less than a public apology for being made scapegoats for carrying out the policy of the ministry which everyone in CARICOM knew and heard about, and of which this minister claims to be unaware. For the past 3 years, we have had a sorry, embarrassing episodes of crises. On reading what is in the public domain about Ambassador Thomas's report on this issue, it is clear that it was primarily due to Minister Moses' incompetence, his sloth in responding to text messages seeking guidance, his refusal to date to acknowledge whether he received a text message from our U.S. ambassador, his clear lack of leadership, and his penchant for passing the buck onto his subordinates. And yet, for reasons unknown, and certainly not in the tradition of Eric Williams, this Prime Minister condones incompetence and non-performance. On September 26th, when asked in Parliament, in this Parliament, if the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs was in any way at fault, the Prime Minister responded that the report made no reference to any wrongdoing on the minister's part. No mention whatsoever that Ambassador Spencer sent an urgent text message requesting confirmation of a directive with which he was uncomfortable. Nothing about the contents of the text message. Nothing about the fact that public servants were carrying out approved policy by the ministry. Nothing about the principle of ministerial responsibility. Nothing about anything except that his anointed minister and his childhood friend was not responsible. under the watch of this minister, the UN has listed Trinidad and Tobago as one of 38 shameful, I quote, countries which carried out reprisals or intimidations against people cooperating with the UN on human rights through killings, torture, and arbitrary arrest. Not a word from the minister on this matter. Trinidad and Tobago has been highlighted in the foreign press multiple times for lack of a policy framework for dealing with Venezuelan refugees fleeing their homeland. This week, the Miami Herald highlighted the treatment of Venezuelans in Trinidad. The minister, true to form, and in the absence of systems and policies to deal with the matter, has abdicated responsibility to the garrulous, overexposed, and underperforming Attorney General. Talk, talk, and more talk. On the 5th of April, 3 Cedros fishermen were detained by the Guardia Nacional. The Minister of Foreign Affairs did not so much as forward a diplomatic note to the Venezuelan authorities protesting this and many other incursions in our territorial waters.
Remember, you have 2 more minutes.
When Trinidad and Tobago families, including wives and children, were detained in Iraq, we did nothing to help them. The minister has done nothing to address the negative travel advisories. The Trinidad Newsday on the 20th of November reported that there's an important meeting being held in Washington. Nearly every prime minister is there, not our prime minister, not our foreign minister. The Trinidad and Tobago High Commissioner to India, Dave Persad, resigned following the lack of knowledge lack of acknowledgement of many concerns about many issues in the TNT mission in India. Not a word from the minister. Our citizens abroad have complained in vain about endless problems encountered in the Miami consulate. Not a word, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Our consulates in Miami, New York, and Toronto are without consul generals. A senior, highly experienced former minister, Donna Cox, is being punished by an embarrassingly junior posting in the New York consulate, while a relative junior has been rewarded with a senior posting in Geneva. Conclusion, our Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs cannot afford, as with this Dominica fiasco, to continually be subject to the incompetence, lack of leadership, and global embarrassment. The minister has repeatedly failed himself, his country, and the office he holds. His utterances in and out of Parliament are pedestrian, incoherent, and obfuscatory. Under this Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, our country's foreign policy is in shambles, and we are no longer respected. The Prime Minister must do the right thing, the patriotic thing, the honorable thing, and put our country's interests above an inexplicable personal friendship. He must fire the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs immediately. Dr. Rowley is doing our country an unforgivable disservice by refusing to act decisively on this matter. Thank you.
I recognize the Acting Minister of Foreign Affairs, Foreign and CARICOM Affairs.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm surprised that this member will stand here to bring a matter on blunders in the international affairs arena, because as you would know, as permanent representative to the United Nations, he chose to dine, the member chose to dine with Madame Marie Le Pen, who was then the head of the FN, the National Front in Paris, known to be of a particular leaning. And not only that, the coarse remarks about Trinidad and Tobago not being an ATM, not the ATM machine of the Caribbean, or the diplomatic fallouts with broken contracts, and the protocol blunders of state visits, the unsuitable appointments of UN missions both in Geneva and in New York, of course, and the damage to the well-established image and reputation worldwide. All of the bogus international awards, disgraceful. All of the trips to Brazil and India and China, chartered flights with relatives and handbag holders. I will answer the question now. The Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs has served as this country's key interlocutor with the external environment at the regional, the hemispheric, and global level since our twin island republic attained independent status in 1962. It is a role and function to which the ministry remains dedicated unwaveringly, particularly in an era that has come to be defined by globalization and its attendant impacts. I wish to emphasize, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that notwithstanding the recent financial constraints, the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs' commitment to ensuring that priority is given to Trinidad and Tobago's foreign representation remains steadfast. Thus, members of staff of the ministry at headquarters and in its 19 overseas missions continue to work assiduously to ensure the highest standards of representation in keeping with our historic, our regional, and our global leadership roles within the Caribbean community and at the hemispheric level and beyond. The Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs has therefore always had systems and policies in place that are subject to periodic review to ensure that despite staffing and other constraints, Trinidad and Tobago continues to maintain its image and its high profile in regional, hemispheric, and international affairs. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Ministry also remains dedicated to promoting regional and international cooperation in an efficient and an effective manner through, among other things, our continued active participation in regional and global fora and the successful promotion of Trinidad and Tobago's interests around the world. A key element of this cooperation has been our central role in CARICOM and our support to our colleagues in the region. The Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs has always played a central role in CARICOM-related matters, as is illustrated by the illustrious cadre of nationals serving at the Secretariat, the overall priority afforded to a variety of issues affecting the community, and the country's notable commitment to the cause of deepening and expanding regional integration. Further evidence may be found in the work the ministry has undertaken in tandem with other government ministries to ensure that all of our structures, all of our systems, all of our policies are in place to facilitate the free movement of skilled nationals under the CARICOM single market and economy, as the implementation of the CSME remains a top priority for Trinidad and Tobago. Indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker, CARICOM heads of governments are scheduled to meet in Port of Spain for a special meeting of the CARICOM single market and economy in December. Mr. Deputy Speaker, all of the foregoing examples telegraph a strong signal that this country's dedication to the regional cause is not merely nominal, but supported by concrete, tangible policy actions. It would therefore be remiss of me not to draw attention to the attention of this House the role of Trinidad and Tobago, the role which Trinidad and Tobago has played in supporting and assisting our regional partners in the aftermath of natural disasters. From the devastation inflicted upon Grenada in 2004 by Hurricane Ivan to flooding in neighboring Guyana in that same year, this country has always adopted a position of being our brother's keeper, and certainly not the what's in it for me approach adopted by your government in the wake of the severe destructions after Tropical Storm Thomas. This principle of brotherhood and of neighborliness has continued to infuse our policies and our commitment to the regional cause, as evidenced by the fact that during the very active 2017 hurricane season, Trinidad and Tobago did not hesitate to render assistance to our CARICOM neighbors in their time of need. And this, of course, even whilst our country sought to grapple with its straitened financial circumstances. I wish to assure this Honourable House that there are systems and procedures which have been in place and which, as mentioned before, undergo periodic review to ensure sustainability, relevance, and practicality. And their existence ensures effectiveness in the execution of the Ministry's mandate, as well as efficient and timely operation. I add, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that any existing deficiencies are being addressed to attain a strengthened foreign service with the capacity to execute its mandate in a manner befitting such an organization and in keeping with the Ministry's operating environment. The particular matter referenced regarding the OAS waiver request of Dominica was investigated within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and independently, and I can give this Honourable House all of the assurances that the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago is being well served. May I add that our relations with the government and people of Dominica remain strong and unshakable, as it is with all of our CARICOM neighbors. I wish to reaffirm that the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs will continue to advance the government's development objectives by strengthening and supporting the pillars of good governance, regional integration, and sustainable development. And these are bedrock principles to which this country has been committed steadfastly and will continue to inform the Ministry's work and mandate as we put people first in order to achieve the objectives of Vision 2030.
All right, members, please. Honorable members, the question is that this House do now adjourn. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it. In accordance with Standing Orders 11 and 12.1, this House now stands adjourned to Friday, the 30th of November, 2018 at 1:30 p.m.